Hello and welcome to the SuperShow podcast. Today I'm your host Alex Jones for the second show of 2024, and whilst we're still waiting for the gaming industry to get going, Jamie and I are here nonetheless to string out what little gaming news there is for your entertainment pleasure. Jamie, how the hell are you doing?
I'm doing unbelievably well, thank you, Mr. Jones, and I can't wait to deliver people exactly what they've been waiting for, which is a volume of video game news that should liberally be discussed at least at most 20 to 30 minutes, and yet we're somehow going to be here for the next 90 arguing over whether or not the person who plays Abby in the Last of Us HBO show should have big arms or not. And I can't wait.
Me either. As you alluded to there, one of the stories we're going to be talking about is the fact that Abby has now been cast for the season 2 HBO's Last of Us. We're also going to touch on the Xbox Developer Direct, which is coming this month, and we are also going to have to talk about that Rocksteady embargo drop because, and one of the reasons we put this sort of like front and centre, cheeky little thumbnail, because Jamie, you and I actually partook in the closed alpha session that we couldn't talk about, and now we can. So yeah, we thought we'd drop some more of our thoughts. We'd talk about what's been going on with Rocksteady and with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. But hey, all of that good stuff to get to. First of all, I want to just do some housekeeping and say that you can reach out to us on YouTube and Twitter at SuperShowPod. We are available not just on YouTube, as you may be seeing us right now live, our lovely, pretty little faces beaming out across the interwebs. You can also catch us audio only across all major podcasting platforms. I'm talking Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or any good place you get your podcast from. We're also on PaisleyRadio.com Thursdays at 10 p.m, repeated Mondays at 10 p.m. But that having been said, Jamie, I think we should jump into this very first story, which we're going to talk about today, which is the fact that, as we just said, Rocksteady did have an embargo that stopped people like you and I, the plebs, I've called us in this little doc we've got in front of us, stopped us discussing and talking about our thoughts around Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. That has now been withdrawn. We can't show images, video, audio, anything actually that we may have recorded, even though we didn't, from the game. We can only share our feelings and our thoughts. But before we sort of get into it and we actually talk about our thoughts around it, I just wanted to give people a reason as to why that may have happened. So some previewers for bigger publications got their hands on the game, and they actually got to play it a bit early and had put out some pretty scathing news stories. So we're talking the likes of GameSpot, Game Informer, and I think IGN are probably the most notorious at this point. There was nothing like overly mean or particularly bad that they said. I think that you could sort of take away and that they'd said, "Oh, this is unplayable," or "This is a complete travesty." But it was just generally like, "This is not good." This is not fun. Things like that. And so, as a sort of like counterpoint to that, seemingly Rocksteady have thought that if they drop the embargo, they'll get some other voices of people that played that closed alpha, and they can sort of put maybe a positive spin on this news cycle before the game's release in February. Pretty interesting turn of events, I would say.
Yeah, kind of unforeseeable in many respects, because I think you're right to focus on the press element to this story first and foremost, because to me, it was the beginning of this bizarre snowballing of things that just don't usually happen. I think the fascinating thing about preview events is that there's, it takes two to tango, right? And usually, if there's a preview event, whether that's in the case of people like you and I who were invited to play a closed alpha as it was at the time, was it late November last year?
It was, then? Yes. The date was, I have it right in front of me, but I can't apparently read. I can't see. And yeah, it was November last year.
Okay. So you've got things like that, and then you've also got what I think happened more recently, which is these slightly more structured events where journalists and writers from websites like IGN, as Jonesy mentioned, might go to physical events. I think they had one in LA, and they will play a build there under very controlled and very closed circumstances. But like I said, yeah, you usually have two elements going into it. One of them is that a round of previews is completely optional. Inviting journalists to come and play your game prior to its release, even in controlled circumstances, is something you choose to do as a PR and marketing move. which means more often than not, it's done by people who feel like they stand to benefit or to gain from the kind of exposure that a round of previews might net them. The second thing
hold on. Something has gone wrong. What has gone wrong?
What's gone wrong?
We have frozen on the YouTube side.
Okay.
Oh no, I think we're back. There may have been a bit of a pause.
Who knows?
Apologies, anyone watching. I think that for some reason we may have frozen whilst Jamie and I could actually talk to one another at length. It seems that it might have actually frozen on the upload side for us. But hey, let's get back into it. I don't know where it might have dropped off.
It's all part of the roller coaster, right? Like, my internet's going to die in the next 10 minutes anyway, and then you won't even be able to talk to me. So let's just enjoy it while we can. Make hay while the sun shines. What I was saying, and I apologize if I'm repeating any of this for people who are listening to it twice after the fact, but basically, because previews, especially the ones that the IGN and Game Informers of the world just took part in, are a choice. There's something that the marketing and PR and comms teams of a video games publisher will opt into, usually for the benefit of the game, because there is some sort of security, and there's some strength in the knowledge that either through the quality of the game and the quality of the build that's present, or through just the positive word of mouth, or getting a bit more information about the game. Long story short, there will be a net positive impact of these round of previews, and that net positive impact is usually reinforced by the fact that games journalists are usually very cautious when handling previews, because you're made aware from the moment you sit down in those chairs, and you and I have sat in them many times over the years, that you're playing unfinished versions of the game. You're not told how old those builds are and how long they might have been around. You don't know which bugs are going to be present at the end and what's going to, which bugs have been ironed out. You don't know which features are still being cooked behind the scenes and might be in a better. And so usually the safest way to go about previewing a game is to kind of pull your punches a little bit and not go too hard, because you don't want to slag off a game for doing something wrong that is fixed by launch. Likewise, you don't want to praise it for something that might not be exactly the same by launch. So usually you just kind of pussyfoot around it, talk about some things you like, talk about things you're excited for or optimistic for, and then at worst, things you're pessimistic about, while acknowledging the time frame the developers have to work with. So to see some of the slightly unusually heavy-handed responses from the biggest outlets in video games, and to talk about one of the most discussed and I don't know if anticipated is the right word to describe Suicide Squad at this point, but it's going to be one of the most talked about games of the year, regardless of what happens. It was a really unusual turn of events, and then, as you said, to have it all end with an embargo that would have been in place for another 3 weeks or more dropped, to essentially allow content creators, and I mean, I don't really consider you or I content creators, we're almost like members of the public at this stage, but
Yeah.
to allow people like us to start sharing our experiences in the hope that it might change the tide somewhat. Fascinating, truly fascinating.
It is, and I just want to, at the risk of boring everyone, I feel like I should give the reasoning and the actual words that Rocksteady gave out as why they dropped this, why they dropped the embargo. So they said, back in November, we held a closed alpha test for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, where players agreed to a non-disclosure agreement and got a chance to check out an early section of the game. Now that there is more news out on the game and players are asking, we're no longer enforcing a portion of the NDA, and we're allowing players to talk about their experiences from the closed alpha test. We've heard the community requests and want to give players an opportunity to discuss what it's like to explore Metropolis as Harley Quinn, Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, and King Shark. To the amazing players who tested the game, please feel free to talk and write about your gameplay experience. Keep in mind that terms of the NDA still apply, so you're not allowed to share videos and footage from the closed alpha test. So I do like the way that they've couched this in. The community have asked for it, so we're allowing it. Hey, go out there and talk about what you thought. Talk about your thoughts and things. I don't know if you saw it, but one of the first discussions I saw of somebody sort of when they realised they could talk about the game and that embargo no longer applied, was SkillUp, who released a video where he said, I played it and I thought it wasn't half bad. And his video was interesting because he played exactly the same section of the game that we played, which is often isn't the case with reviewers. You know, they get to play a lot more than you or I get to play of a game, especially these days. But I must admit, I didn't find myself agreeing with most of what he said. Like some of the things he said about how, the enjoyment factor and the mechanics and the traversal, and he was like, oh, this is pretty good, and hey, the way you fight these enemies is pretty decent. Personally, I found a lot of what he was talking about, like sections that I found just quite dull and joyless, and they're not much fun to be had, unfortunately. And so I think it's pretty obvious why they dropped the embargo was because of, like you said, how hard some of the mainstream outlets like IGN, GameSpot, Game Informer, how hard they went. And like I said, I don't even think they necessarily meant to go that hard. They basically just said it's kind of dull, a bit uninspired, doesn't do much, doesn't push the format. And I suppose they were kind of saying that they were a little let down by, hoping that a company like Rocksteady would come out of something that would really sort of blow you away, and maybe that wasn't what it was. But it was surprising. It was for sure and surprising to see that those reviews of the previews come out in such scathing terms when usually we're used to seeing the mainstream element be very kid-glovey with especially big developers who have sort of a good track record.
Yeah, I also think it doesn't help that obviously everything needs to be condensed where possible for the sake of social media. Articles need to be whittled down to headlines, YouTube videos need titles. And for IGN Suicide Squad preview to be, we played it and didn't like it, that might be an accurate, and probably is, an accurate encapsulation of everything that was present in, I didn't read the article, but certainly watched the video that IGN produced around the game. But in and of itself, considering that there are plenty of people out there, the majority of people out there, whether they were looking forward to the game or not, hadn't even really seen uncut sequences of gameplay beyond what had been very carefully tailored to in certain gameplay trailers and so on and so forth. It's a bit of a shock. You just don't expect to hear a major outlet talk about a major game in that way so early. And then obviously the problem was, and this is the other element that kind of came alongside the media embargo dropping the other week, was that footage then began flooding onto the internet. And as you and I discussed, all the way back with Chris over the years, going back to the infamous state of play just before what now looks to have been the final delay, where we saw uncut sequences of gameplay, we looked at a lot of that and said, I can't really tell if I would enjoy that or not. There's a lot going on. I can't really get a feel just by watching it for the traversal systems or the combat or how meaty or heavy the gunplay might feel, for example. A lot of that stuff doesn't get communicated immediately. And so you're watching these videos that are being derided everywhere you look for being too bright, too colourful, too Fortnite-y, which I'm slightly annoyed that has just become everyone's go-to expression for anything that is slightly oversaturated and has unrealistic character proportions. Even off by a percentage in terms of their proportions, but whatever, I'm not going to slate the internet for that. But when those videos are going around and people are taking screenshots and going, oh my god, look at the HUD, look at how many elements there are on the HUD, look how many bars and virtual currencies there are and timers and this and that, and this game looks like a hot mess. And IGN, the kings of the 7 out of 10, said that they didn't like it. Wow, this game is doomed. We've waited 9 years for Rocksteady to make a game, and this is it. We still incorrectly believe that they were working on a single-player Superman game that got cancelled when that game never even existed, according to Jason Schreier. So people have all sorts of bees in their bonnet, multiple bees at once, scalp stung all over, and it just all combined for what is a pretty rough time for the game, which is, and I feel the horrible thing is, I feel like I'm saying all of this to set up a conversation where you and I go and often discuss some of the game's more redeemable factors. But as you just pointed out, if anything, we're not going to pile on the misery for this game, but neither of us have particularly glowing things to say about our actual experiences with it, which amounted to, I would say, because we played some sequences multiple times, we probably played about 3 or 4 hours each.
Yeah.
And we played everything that the people would have seen in previews up to and not including a boss fight against the Flash, which the media outlets got to do, and there is footage of out there. And I'll be honest, I think if we had done that boss fight with the Flash Jonesy, I'd come away from this thing feeling even more negative than I do already. But yeah.
All right then. So that aside, the reasons for the embargo dropping aside, and how much has been sort of gently or not so gently slagged off by the big outlets, let's have a quick chat about what we thought of our time with Justice League. Suicide Squad, kill the Justice League.
I mean, we did spend some time with the Justice League. Batman looked at us a couple of times.
We did. Right. Should we try and do some positives first? If you could take any positives away from the time we had with it, because Jamie and I played it together and also a little bit apart. So we did a bit of co-op stuff. We got to go around that environment together, which is I always like doing. As we always say, any co-op game played with friends is always better. And it's so, this isn't to say. So anything that we did in that was slightly improved by the fact that we got to laugh about it, playing it to get even stuff that's not necessarily good. When you get to laugh about it and you get to slag it off a little bit, you find enjoyment in some of the most mundane games. But let's have a couple of your positives if you can find any.
Okay, and I will caveat that some of what I say over the next chunk of time might sound contradictory because there are negatives buried within some of the positives and positives buried within some of the negatives. But if I were to kind of try and pan for gold for a bit and just try and talk about the things that, even if I didn't like them, I think are commendable. One thing that struck me straight away is that even though we've seen a lot of, we've seen two in form of motion pictures, iterations of Suicide Squad's vast roster at this point, and you'll have seen far more if you watch animated shows, for example. There are plenty of other versions of King Shark and Harley Quinn and stuff like that out there. I do think they're kind of they managed to stray away from territory that felt well worn in terms of what I've seen, at least having watched Suicide Squad and the Suicide Squad. Their characterizations of those four individuals seem unique enough. The writing around them was hit and miss. There are some funny moments and some funny sequences, but a lot of the moment-to-moment banter didn't land for me. And that's the stuff you kind of sometimes need to be worried about in this game, because that's sometimes the stuff that you kind of hit over the head with over the course of your time with a game is the banter between the fights, as opposed to the cutscenes, which can be a little bit more handcrafted and one-off jokes can be heard and told. I think that careful handling of the characters also extends to how they play and making sure they all play different. You could tell that this was a game that when they set out, one of the objectives they had for it was this is going to be a game that is going to contain 4 protagonists, that is going to be playable in single player and co-op, but we want to make sure that in theory, a player could play through the campaign 4 times with each of the 4 characters and have a significantly different feeling experience as a result of that. And I think they've come a commendable way towards that goal. And at the start of the game, I don't know if it'll be the same in the final product, you, as part of the tutorial, are forced to do basically a loose sort of traversal tutorial for all 4 to make sure you understand the mechanics of getting around Metropolis, no matter who you jump in as. And when I was doing those tutorials back to back to back, I was like, okay, these feel different. Captain Boomerang's weird sort of glitchy, jumpy boomerang traversal feels very different to Deadshot's jetpack, which feels very different to King Shark's just natural sort of agility and his ability to jump very high. Harley Quinn's was possibly the weakest, which was based off sort of repels and sort of
repelling on a bat wing, which kind of flew above her head all the time, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that between the simplicity of Deadshot's and the uniqueness of Captain Boomerang's, those were the 2 that I was attracted to the most. And again, they genuinely felt like different ways of getting around Metropolis, and I think they fed into different types of gameplay, different types of combat. Once you learn that Deadshot can hover for a significant period of time in midair to fire using a jetpack, in the same way you would have in something like Anthem, for those who bothered playing that back in the day. You start using that a lot more, which is very different to Captain Boomerang, who's a lot more kind of getting onto the ground, and he's got this really powerful slide, and his melee feels great. He throws the boomerang, which primes people to get shot, and they all have anyone can equip any gun as far as I remember, but they have strengths in terms of the guns that they can equip. So you do naturally feel yourself drawn towards shotguns as boomerang and long range ARs and sniper rifles as Deadshot. A lot of that stuff was quite effective and well handled, I thought. Positives.
I will agree with you on that. I think the
Okay.
I think the dynamic traversal systems mixed with like the way they want you to engage with combat really like do work in concert together quite well. Like for example, King Shark, his sort of ability to move around and then use his minigun is sort of done in a very different way to Boomerang's ability to sort of appear almost behind enemies with his teleportation boomerang and use a shotgun. Like they've and like you said with Deadshot and his sort of hover and his assault rifle ability, they've obviously sort of crafted it so that you want to use the right character with the right weapon type. I found it odd that they then gave you the ability to just use whatever you wanted anyway. Because would you not think you would gravitate somewhat towards weapon types that you're used to using in other games, which is one of the things I thought I probably would do, like irrespective of who I was.
I think certain players will trend that way anyway. I think there's going to be a certain subset of players who see an a assault rifle, recognize an assault rifle, and use an assault rifle, regardless of how much it matches up with that play style. It'd be interesting to see again where like that's how they could potentially utilize some of the characters' more unique traits and skill trees. I can't remember off the top of my head if they reinforce the usage of certain weapons over others. Like because there must be a gameplay reason I just can't recall for characters to have like preferred weapons. So I think I don't know. I felt it was natural to adhere to what the character would prefer to use, and then letting my choice of character dictate which weapons I ended up wanting to using. So I didn't feel a draw at all to become King Shark and start using pistols or submachine guns, for example.
Right.
I would instead switch to Harley Quinn and use submachine guns. That was the way my brain ended up kind of like making sense of it all.
So I did
But
the
at the
same
same
thing,
time,
but I did it on
I didn't-
purpose.
No, but I see what you mean.
I meant it. I was like, no, I'm King Shark now. I'm going to use a minigun. Like I purposefully made that choice, and I wondered if I would stick with that throughout the game.
I think people will.
Which I'm not. I mean, maybe I'm spending too long on something which is kind of irrelevant. But we've talked about this before. I really like asymmetric. Not necessarily asymmetric shooters, but asymmetric teams within shooters, whereby one character has sort of like certain elements and they can only use certain guns and they can only do certain things. I think that adds an interesting dynamic to a game like this where you've got a group of people who can sort of. I want them to be different. I don't just want everyone to end up feeling beige.
No, I think they do feel different. Like I think here's what I'd say. I want to say the first tutorial you do in the game is either Deadshot or Captain Boomerang. I'm pretty sure it's Deadshot. If you did that tutorial and said I'm done here and quit and went into the main game and then immediately switched to Captain Boomerang and tried to traverse the city, you'd have a couple of minutes of like, what's going on here? And
You'd
like,
be in trouble, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to they've gone further than some games would have in making those characters unique in some respects. The frustrating thing is I don't know if they're unique enough in all respects to make it like being a campaign that is worth, as I suggested earlier, playing multiple times.
Yeah.
Let alone once. And then you obviously, as we'll get into, once you get into the nitty gritty of the combat encounters themselves and the kind of the enemies you're coming up against, the way the guns feel to use, to put it as simple in terms as possible. Once you start getting into that kind of territory, the appeal of familiarizing yourself with these different characters and jumping between them, or keeping them all leveled up, or keep making sure everyone has the best loot they can have, starts to dissipate.
So if I was to pick out some of the positives that I remember from my time with it, I would say that the things like the story, the voice acting, when you encounter because you get to encounter, if I remember rightly, the Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman,
Batman,
and Batman all within that sort of quite quickly within the first, say, half an hour, or no, not half hour, but like the first hour and a half, you don't get to fight them, but you do get to interact with them and engage with them in the open world to kind of set up their stories. You're also introduced to a couple of other characters, like Riddler, for example. He introduces the first idea of sort of like Riddler challenges, and you've got to solve some of these in-world riddles to get whatever it is, I can't remember, loot crates or whatever it is. And whilst all of that stuff is well acted, sounds good, looks good, and the main cast as well, I think that they've done a very good job with how all of they sound. It just doesn't seem to fit. If I remember how I felt in the open world fighting the purple guys, to me was not enjoyable, and that's where I kind of came to. It reached a bit of a head for me. Was I've got this very Rocksteady potential single player campaign game with these really good characters, well written stuff, potentially exciting boss fights, and then you're put in this open world where it's like just fight. Do you know what they remind me of a little bit? Is it the putties from Power Rangers? Is it
you're asking the wrong guy, I'm afraid. I'm not a Power Rangers man.
Where the Power Rangers would be sort of like walking around, and then suddenly these stupid things would just appear, like purple things, just appear out of nowhere, and it would be a ridiculous mob fight where it's kind of boring and pointless, but they just keep popping up, and that's kind of how I felt in the open world in this game.
Yeah, no, there is definitely a bit of it that feels that way, and like the encounters never felt I never felt, no matter which character I played as or like how in control of their tool set and skill set that I felt I never felt like I kind of got fluid enough to feel like I was really entering a flow state. And for all the games that it's sort of being compared to, it is maybe trying to riff off like some of the the third person shooting fundamentals of even things like Anthem that I mentioned to some of Rocksteady's previous work. Like there is an idea, as dumb as it sounds, of a counter shot. So in the same way like Batman could press Y or triangle to counter an enemy, like now if you see an enemy about to attack, you can aim at them and press R1 rather than R2 on a PlayStation 5 controller to shoot a different kind of bullet that, if you time it right, counters them and leaves them more vulnerable and does more damage. It's so an interesting idea on paper, doesn't always work in practice. And then you've also got what people have, I guess, compared to sort of the slightly more Sunset Overdrive-y approach of, hey, how well can you combine traversal mechanics with gunplay? And the answer for me was, even after a handful of hours with the game, never as well as I felt like I wanted to. I never felt like I was fully in control of my character. I never felt like I was fully like maneuvering in all the ways I wanted to and combining. I never felt like I was doing shit that would look cool if I saved a replay and watched it back,
Right.
And which was weird because I was getting through those encounters with no problems. Like I wasn't dying, I was killing everyone, and I was occasionally doing cool shit. But I never felt like I was doing the kind of cool shit that I was like not promised, but sold on in some respects. And that ended up being a bummer. That was. I kept wanting the next combat encounter and the next mission sequence to prove me wrong and to be the thing where I found some joy. And there were, again, like hints of it here or there. But in the time we had in the alpha, I never quite got there. And yeah, that was one of the most significant disappointments for me of that alpha, is that I never quite entered into that sort of like flow state that I wanted to, as I was, sliding and hopping and teleporting around and shotgunning and meleeing and doing all these things that should look cool. And as I was unlocking the skill tree, and there were like almost allusions to Sunset Overdrive style systems where like almost building up higher combos might unlock more ability. So like the more cool shit you're doing in one long consistent movement, the more shit is happening on top of that. But it never felt like it was actually like clicking for me. I don't know.
No, I'm totally with you. I think we talked about it looking a lot like Sunset Overdrive. I'm going back like probably a couple of years when we first started seeing anything about this. It was like, wow, This looks very Sunset Overdrive. And then there's also things in there that I kind of then got frustrated with. So, for example, because of the way this game works and because it is gun weapons first game, like you can obviously melee people, but you're going to be shooting people mostly, and you've got like those good traversal systems. They've obviously said, well, this is me again saying this is what developers do. It seems like they've said, oh look, the purple guys are too easy to take out, so we're just going to have them pop shields up everywhere. So it makes it slightly more difficult to like get behind the shield, or you have to shoot a specific part of the shield to take the shield out. And I'm like, but that's not fun. Like, you just spamming the world with groups of enemies that don't do anything, don't say anything, just sort of run around shooting at you in little clumps, and then they're shielded. It just becomes busy work. And that is, you can't just say, well, we've got a big open world, and we've got all this busy work for you to do. And they've also said, oh, do you know, there are tanks in there as well. Oh, how'd you take out the tanks? There's purple spots on the tanks that they're the weak points, and if you shoot the weak, and you've got to get around the tank and shoot the back of the tank or shoot the side of the tank. Like, this is like game making from the days of old, smashed into a game that should be like fantastic. It should be fantastic. It's Justice League, it's Suicide Squad, it's Rocksteady. Like, if you bring everything together, like, think how good the Arkham games were. Sure, they had groups of little enemies who stood about and you could beat up, but they were just fodder for Batman to take a pop at. So I don't know. It's kind of, it's frustrating. It's annoying. Dare I invoke the name Gotham Knights when I say that I don't necessarily think this is really, do you know what, on the basis of it, I think where we are now, this is going to be a prediction for me. If I end up playing Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, I think I might rate Gotham Knights higher than I rate Suicide Squad. And which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
But
I don't think I will.
That's fair.
I can say that now. I found Gotham Knights to be quite repulsive the more time I spent with it.
And it is. And the fact that it had some fundamentally broken stuff in it and things that obviously weren't supposed to work in that way. But at least when I remember that game, there was sort of sections of it where you had multiple strands to a story that led you to fight a certain boss or, you know, take out a certain villain in an interesting way. If the upshot of this game is that you don't even get that, you don't even get those multi-layered fights with the different bosses. I'm sure you will, with some of them at the very least. I could see it ending up feeling even flatter than that game. It's not to say Gotham Knights is better. It's more to say, like, this could be worse in some respects, which worries me.
That's fair enough. If you want to phrase it that way, I won't argue with you. And, like, you're right, there are still way too many unknowns with
very many.
Suicide Squad. Like, there is one sequence that I can't remember, there's probably footage of it out there somewhere, but I don't know if it's out there in an uncut format. But where it does take place in an interior environment, and that interior environment, without saying what it is or why it's interesting, is like quite detailed and has, let's just say, it has throwbacks to other things that the Rocksteady and have done before and things from the Arkhamverse in a kind of presented in an interesting way. But during that sequence, here's the problem: I think the sequence was fundamentally bad in that I didn't really understand what was going on, and if a player doesn't understand what's going on while something like that is happening, I think you've messed up somewhere.
Yeah.
But it involves essentially being stalked by Batman. And I will say now, unless it's different by the time of the release, it's nowhere near as cool as I'm going to make it sound. But you essentially get stalked by Batman, and each of the Suicide Squad get kind of taken out by Batman in different ways. And then you get to a sequence at the end, which plays out in a cutscene where you're witnessing firsthand the effects of some of the Justice League, being under the effects of what's the dude's Brainiac? Being under the effects of Brainiac's, whatever it is, some of them not. And it essentially leads to a confrontation between a Brainiacified Batman and the Flash. And you see how far you basically get to see what it looks like when a team like Rocksteady, who still fundamentally clearly have fascinating ideas and care and love and affection for the DC universe and its characters, you get to see what it looks like when Rocksteady make Batman the bad guy. And there was like a holy shit moment in there where I was like, that's really cool seeing Batman do that, because I've never seen these people do that. And if I get to see Superman do that in the future, like, there's some really interesting threads there that I really hope they...
Doesn't Boomerang even say a line of something like, or someone says, like, don't worry, Batman doesn't kill people, and then he like stabs him or does something, and then it's like, holy shit. And then
Batman goes fucking ham. Batman fucking turns, Flash's face to mush, basically. And yeah, it's like it makes you take a step back in a way that I think that there's so much room there for interesting material, and I don't know how much they're going to explore that. Hopefully, loads as the game goes on. It's also interesting. Like we can't give too much, time to leaks, but it is interesting to see the people who are out there who are leaking kind of like plans for the game going forward, and you're reading like. And I'm trying not to read too much into it or believe too much of it, but like you're reading for like the plans for this game months down the line, and like plans they have for the world, plans they have for potential playable characters down the line, potential villains down the line. And you're like, for as much as live service games rub people up the wrong way, it is interesting here that if they do make like at least a fine or a solid base for a game, and in a year's time, kind of like what happened with Marvel's Avengers, except hopefully a better foundation to work from. You're reading an article where you're like, this character is being added to Suicide Squad, and this season is all about this character invading Metropolis, and they do this to the world, and you're like, actually, that could be really cool. Ultimately, things like Spider-Man and Black Panther didn't work out for Marvel's Avengers because the fundamental baseline offering was so disappointing. But if Suicide Squad can clear that level, and I think it can, then I think there could be something to the long-term success of this game or the long-term viability of the game. It's going to be interesting to see. And like I said to you and Chris earlier via text, like if you're out there worried about live service components, if you're out there worried about DLC, microtransactions, games as a service, server side shit, always online shit, like there are far bigger concerns to have about this game at the moment than any of that. Like that is like let's focus on hoping the game is okay first, because that is the first hurdle to jump over, and it's not doing it yet for my tastes.
I would agree with you. I will say that, and I said this to you guys earlier, the one saving grace or potential saving grace for me is, and is what we don't know yet and what we haven't seen, is I think despite all the negatives, despite some of the stuff that I don't like, I feel like there is a potential for the boss fight sections. Like I've already said, like that Batman's introduction to Batman section was something very different, and then the Batman and Flash bits were a bit different.
Did you watch the Flash fight though? Surely that drains all confidence you had.
I didn't watch the Flash. I didn't watch the Flash fight yet.
It looks so boring.
I'll go watch it after this, but that is the one thing I'm holding out for, is that there is this multi-layered, multifaceted element to the boss fights, which makes you think, do you know what? Even though some of this other stuff is kind of lackluster, even though the gunplay in that can be dull, actually there is some Rocksteady like gold in here, and maybe that's what ends up happening, is you almost weather sort of 60% of the game to get to the 40%, which is really good. And I'm holding out hope for that. Maybe stupidly.
No, I don't think it's stupid. I think I'm going to hold out hope the whole time. Like, it's interesting. I've name dropped Anthem a couple of times in this chat, and Anthem was a game like right up until Anthem 2.0 or whatever it was going to be called was officially cancelled, which I think happened around the early days of this podcast, or at least it was being talked about in the early days of this podcast. I was like, yeah, do Anthem 2.0, because there's enough good shit and cool shit in Anthem that if there's a good version of Anthem in the future, I'll play it.
Yeah, agreed, yeah.
And like there have been plenty of games from, Destiny 1 to Diablo 3 to Final Fantasy 14. And I know we're starting to get into kind of like quasi MMO and MMO territory, and maybe that's unfair, but there have been plenty of games that took a long time to get where they needed to be, or that weren't the finished article off the bat, and with time they got there. And so I'm never not going to be hopeful. Optimistic's the wrong word, but I'm never not going to want this game to be everything it can be. And so I don't think there's any naivety in that, or there's anything wrong with that. But much like Anthem, it is one of those things where the closer we get to it and the more I see from it, the more I think, like, actually, it's tempting to come up with conspiracy theories. It's tempting to look at shit that doesn't make sense and sort of fill in the blanks with like some other weird agenda. Like Rocksteady were forced to make a multiplayer game. Rocksteady were forced to make a live service game. Rocksteady didn't get to make the game they wanted to make. Warner Brothers forced their hand. Start getting into conspiracy theories or getting into weeds about why it was delayed, what they were doing with the downtime, and all that kind of shit. the closer we get to the release, the more inclined I am to believe that this was always the game that Rocksteady wanted to make, much like Anthem was always, in some respects, the game that BioWare wanted to make. The fundamentals were always there. It's just it didn't come together like the way it did in someone's head 7 years ago.
And we've been there in obviously in a very different way, like as editors making videos where you have an idea, you have a great idea, the concept's really good, you get all the elements together and then you try and produce something really good, and then you get to a certain point and you're like, this just isn't what I wanted it to be, but I'm so far down this path there's no possible way I can go back. I just have to make the best of what I've got. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happened to Rocksteady with this game, but I'm just saying there's potential for that to be, an element. I will say as well, the chat is on a bit of a downer because we're just sort of like,
oh no,
and we're not. I don't want to say that all the reviews are going to come out for this one, the week before this game drops, and they're all going to be negative and it's all going to be doom and gloom. There may be people that really get on with this, that really like it.
I think there will be. Yeah,
I
there will be.
I agree. I think there will be as well. There is still some fantastic, Rocksteady sort of blood running through this in certain areas that people are really going to get on board with. And if you can get through certain things and you don't mind certain things in games, you might love this, like the way that the combat works. A lot of that stuff wasn't necessarily for me, or Jamie as well, or a lot of other people. I do have a question though from the chat. This is coming in from, and I thought this is a good question to give a little preview. What's the word? Prediction, as we did last week. So maybe we can add this to our list of predictions.
Oh no.
Randall Flag has got a question which is based on our opinions of the beta. How long is this game going to stay live for?
Oh god. Oh, that feels so.
So we're not going playable. We're saying like supported live service. So
hang on, we need to be very careful here because Marvel's Avengers is still playable.
Exactly, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So it can end up like Marvel's Avengers, and that's fine. But we're talking about live. So we're talking about the company supporting the game and making new content for it.
We're talking about the moment where Rocksteady put out the tweet saying thank you to all the massive Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League community for all their love and support over the years. While the servers will remain up, the version 2.14 update that drops on this date
will
this
be
year
will
be the last update. There will be no further updates, bug fixes.
There'll be a very small team working on very specific bugs as and when they arise, but there'll be no new content for the game. Okay. What do you reckon? So we are Jan 15th, 2024.
Game comes out early Feb. Year one is has to be almost entirely in the books. I'd say a large portion of year one content. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. I'm doing something a little bit cheeky. I'm looking up the most expensive version of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League that you can buy and seeing if they allude to how long you've got kind of like a battle pass for.
I think it's £100, isn't it?
There is a £100 version of the game. Yes.
I think it's a deluxe digital version is £100, which I was shocked that it's that expensive.
Yeah, so it basically in the deluxe edition you get a battle pass token, which is redeemable in exchange for a premium battle pass access. But in the small print in the legal info, it says battle pass token redeemable for premium battle pass access (brackets seasons 1 to 4 battle passes subject to availability). So in the legal info, they're saying that the token that comes with the expensive version of the game will only be eligible for exchanging in the first 4 seasons, but that means they're at least thinking as far ahead as 4 seasons, a month and a half to 2 months. I think that. Oh man, okay. I basically it's confusing because I don't think it will be like a dramatic Marvel's Avengers style tweet, but I think we will stop getting significant additions to Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League around end of summer 2025. I'm
2025.
Yeah, I think there's going to be 18 months of surprisingly solid support. Well, how long was Marvel's Avengers being fully supported for? Entirely new characters, campaigns.
Oh no, but I'm saying to the tweet where we're no longer supporting it. Because I'm with you. I think 18 months easily of new stuff, new characters, blah. But I think we'll get that tweet thank you to the fans. We're no longer supporting the game, but it will still be live for a period. I think we've got a decent. I think it's got a decent run. I think it'll have a bit of a resurgence based on some stuff.
I might have actually been unfair.
I think Avengers went longer than you're thinking.
Marvel's Avengers had 3 years.
I was going to say 3 years for this. I was going to say 2027.
I'm wrong.
I'll say Q1 2027 is what I was. That was my initial thoughts and thinking. I thought Avengers went 2.5 years, but so 3 years.
But it's also hard. It's also hard when you don't know the scope of the support for the game. Like, again, Marvel's Avengers, we knew there were going to be additional Avengers, but like, did we know we were going to get that entire Black Panther campaign with an entire new location and like all the kind of work that went into that? Like, I don't know what the future looks like for Suicide Squad, but I think that will be the other thing that helps define how long it's going to be. But you're right, 18 months was far too short.
You can revise. You can revise if you want.
Well, I just have no idea. I just have no idea.
Fair. That is fair.
Like, like 3 years as well. I just don't know. I have no. I don't. All right. I'm struggling to either come up with an estimate.
3. Let's say we both are around the ballpark of 3 years. So let's call it 3 years. But
so when the podcast is still going in 2027, we'll see if we were right.
There you go. We'll do even if it's not going, we'll do a special edition. We'll bring it back just for one to talk about
Patreon exclusive for the one person who forgot they were still on the $2 tier in 3 years' time and had accidentally been giving us money.
This is going out to one person. Yeah, there we go. Well, hey, hopefully for Rocksteady's sake, it lasts long and that does really well. And we're totally wrong. I wish them all the best. I'm a big fan of the Arkham trilogy. And Rocksteady in general, so let's hope for their sake.
Rocksteady are rad. Video games are rad. They clearly can make great games. I hope this is one of them, and I hope they continue to make them afterwards. I hope Rocksteady and the games industry in general continues to grow. I hope no one else gets laid off or fucking made redundant for the rest of the fucking year, because 2024 has already been depressing as all hell. Always hoping for the best.
No, absolutely. They are rad. And I know another group of people that are rad, Jamie. I'm talking our patrons who support us over at patreon.com/SuperShow.
Fuck yeah.
They are an awesome, rad group of people. And because some of you are here right now having a little chat and watching us live. I'm actually going to give a shout out to some people because we didn't do it already. So thank you for joining us on the live. I'm talking Nick Leaks, Amnestus, Randall Flagg, Bill Caesar, 69 DJ, Classy Cat in the house, Leo Dunlop. Who else are we going to give a shout out to?
Me.
You, Jamie. No, that's everyone I can see at the moment. So, no, thank you everybody for joining us on the live. But as I said, thank you to all the patrons. Thank you for your continued support week in, week out. It really does keep the lights on, keep us coming back week after week. We wouldn't not be able to do this without you, and we are humbled when we still see that people are supporting us and coming back as well, just to chat, just to drop a comment, just to give a shout out. It's wicked. It's fantastic. We really enjoy it. So thank you so much for doing that. There are some names on screen right now of some people that we would like to pay some respects to, but I'm also going to give a shout out to some special people. I'm going to shout out Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Ice Dog Rock Salt, Jesper Camden Nielsen, Pastors Guild, and the big dogs, the members of the board. It is Brett Z, aka Shell Shock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw McReed, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Like I said, thank you everyone. Thank you for supporting. Thank you for chatting, for being here, for watching, for listening. It is, it's wicked. And it means that Jamie and I can come back week after week and we can talk about games that we love and games that we might hate in the future. Like Suicide Squad.
God, don't, Jamie. And I will also plug, hopefully not too preemptively, that as we hurtle distressingly towards episode 200, keep your eyes peeled to all the relevant channels and networks and what have you over the next coming weeks and months, as hopefully we'll have some interesting pieces of content, kind of the kind of stuff that we haven't been able to do for a little while. I won't tease too heavily because who knows,
just in case
anything will actually come to pass. You don't want to. We should be under promising and over delivering, but we've got some cool ideas for some content in the coming weeks and months. So stick around and stay tuned for all of that.
I missed out one person on the chat. Neil D. I'm sorry, I didn't see you
Neil
until
D.
Neil
And
D.
as
Shout out.
Jonesy, I have to remind you every time, but that is actually the Neil Diamond who you are failing to remember as well.
Every time. How
As
can I?
if the man who brought Sweet Caroline into the world is a SuperShow fan, and you're showing him such disrespect.
Sweet
Neil,
Caroline. Bum, bum.
Mr. Diamond, I should say. I apologise on behalf of Alex.
Well, I think at this point, Jamie, Neil Diamond probably does. I know I want to hear what you've been playing or watching or getting up to in the last week since the last podcast.
What can I offer? Do you know what you kind of upstaged me a little bit this week, because while I haven't been able to do a huge amount, I played a little bit of something courtesy of a demo, only to come out and chat to you today to find that you'd been playing the full fat retail release. So I'm going to let you share your thoughts with the world on that, and I might just use the background knowledge I have courtesy of that demo to kind of prod and probe at some of your wider thoughts on the game. But I will just say that goodness, I'm slightly emotionally fragile at the moment. I, for whatever reason, decided to watch a very sad film last night. I haven't entirely recovered, which isn't helped because I've been watching the soundtrack, listening to the soundtrack all day while I'm at work and intermittently weeping. So shout out to Past Lives. That might end up being my favorite film that was technically released in the year of 2023. And just because I've got nothing else to say before we move on to something far more interesting, I will say that I am also now, as it's a PlayStation Plus game, finally making good on a Plague Tale Requiem, which was very handy because I played a Plague Tale Innocence for the first time last year, way late, because just on a whim, I was like, it's sitting in my library, I might as well try it. It's got a PS5 version. Obviously, Requiem is now a PlayStation Plus game, and I'm playing it, and those games are great. I don't really... I have a weird sort of love-hate relationship with some stealth games, which is weird because when I think back on it, it's mostly love. Because I like Metal Gear and I like Splinter Cell and I like, Arkham Asylum and shit like that. But basically, what I'm trying to say is stealth can very easily piss me off, and a Plague Tale doesn't do that too much. It offers a sensible balance between being underpowered and overpowered, and in situations where you're underpowered, you don't feel like you don't have to hide in lockers like you do in a first-person horror game. You're still sort of like maneuverable, and the story is wretched and dark and distressing and harrowing, but gripping in equal measure. So basically, shout out to the Plague Tale games, and I'm sorry it took me so long to play you both. But Jonesy, I played half an hour of a game that you played 2 to 3 hours off, if memory serves.
Couple of hours, yeah.
The latest release from the publisher famous for never talking about the games they publish. It's Ubisoft.
Yeah, so this is... we've talked about Prince of Persia a couple of times. This is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which is the new 2D side-scrolling Metroidvania game from Ubisoft. I think I've slagged it off a few times, purely based on the fact that I was excited about the remake of Sands of Time, and when that was absolutely, I don't even know the word for it, like what they did to that remake was abysmal.
We can call it an abomination.
It was an abomination and has been, rejigged, redone, handed to multiple teams, and had a 30 million different chefs trying to sort it out, still to no avail. I wasn't holding out much hope for this, which looked like a modern reimagining of the traditional Prince of Persia games, which I used to play and I used to like on PC back in the day. So, which is very much like a Pitfall game where you're running along, jumping over a pit, and that's about it. Very minimal combat, as you can imagine, back in the early 90s. However, I was surprised to see some very good reviews coming from this. And when I actually watched some of the footage and saw what the game was all about, I was very pleasantly surprised by what I saw, and so decided that I would jump in with both feet, and not only buy the game, but also buy the extra £5 version, so like the deluxe edition, which meant you got to play the game 3 days early. So it meant I got to sort of jump in and have a bit of a play. And so far, so after a couple of hours, loving it. Like, genuinely think it's a fantastic game. It's definitely giving me like I haven't played a Metroidvania game for a while, and like Metroid Dread was the last sort of game like that I played.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is totally scratching that itch, down to like the idea of, if you find an area that you don't have an ability to get across yet, you can drop I can't remember what they call it. Like you effectively take a screenshot, but it pins it to the map so that you know to go back there at a later date, and you can try and traverse it in a different way.
That was really cool, I thought.
Oh, fantastic. Like, such a good little mechanic they've got, because I used to hate being like, I can't quite remember where that thing is, and then trying to was just frustrating. But yeah, no, I this was something I did not expect to like as much as I have done. But as we've said, Ubisoft never promote anything anywhere anymore, and I don't know why it seems that way. I don't know if it's true or whether I'm just wrong about it, but it seems to be that way. But this game is fantastic in the couple of hours that I've played it. It's opening up really nicely. It's gradually introducing all the different skills and like amulets and stuff that give you little buffs and things. It's introducing the idea of like the time, the ability to control time that you can do like in Prince of Persia games. So far, yeah, having a fantastic time. New character, Sargon. You get to play one of these immortals, these group of warriors, and you're at the beginning of the game anyway. You're trying to save a prince who's been kidnapped by one of your own, by another immortal. Yeah, so far fantastic. Thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, no, I that's really encouraging to hear, and I think the best thing about it is that it echoes a lot of the other sentiment you're seeing out there, both in terms of audience responses and sort of content creator responses, but also critic responses. And it's interesting. I don't know if you kind of have any feelings or insight into this, especially as a long-time Prince of Persia fan, but it's fascinating watching Ubisoft get what feels like their most critically acclaimed game
for a long time.
Yeah, especially as even what were traditionally the heavy hitters like the Far Cry's and Assassin's Creeds of the world have kind of tailed off into the mid-70s territory. That Avatar game ended up coming in, I think, at the low 70s. And then you just have other random things kind of here or there, like Riders Republic. I guess the last Mario and Rabbids game was technically Ubisoft. That probably did okay, but this feels like unequivocal positivity around a unique twist on a Ubisoft. So many different adjectives that don't get usually used to describe that publisher, and yet I'm sitting here looking at this and saying, great word of mouth, a game that doesn't cost full price. I believe even if you buy the more expensive version, as you did, Jonesy, I think it's $49.99.
That's right. Yeah.
So, which is very solid, and I'm sure it's even cheaper perhaps on PC or translates very nicely to dollars and what have you. But like, how many Prince of Persia fans are there out there? It's a series that feels like it's been away for a little while, and while things like the Sands of Time remake that you mentioned have obviously increased the rumblings around the series, it's not exactly like a marquee Ubisoft franchise anymore. They showed it off a handful of times. Like it was at their event last summer, and it's been a Keighley event and stuff like that. But like, I just don't know how well this is, and like I hope it surprises me. I hope like it exceeds expectations and becomes this kind of like weird win for Ubisoft, where Yves gets an email one day when he's sat in his office, and it's like from his secretary that says, "Hey, just so you know, remember how we took the Prince of Persia franchise, like rebooted it, but went back to basics, took like a kind of a twist on, like you said, the really old school approach to the series, but like took a lot of the modern day conventions of what is an increasingly popular genre, but put some of our own twists on it, and like just like revitalized it rather than making the same thing over and over again, and sold it for slightly less than full price, and it worked." Like, that would be an amazing takeaway for Ubisoft. And I could see there being a thing where, like, people ask for future entries in the Assassin's Creed series or the Far Cry series or what have you to get the Lost Crown treatment. I can see a world where that becomes a thing. I just don't know how well this is going to do, how much weight the Prince of Persia name holds nowadays, whether the lack of marketing and promotion will hurt it, and whether or not that becomes a thing. because they've been here before when they did this with the two Rayman games. Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends were beautiful, fantastic platformers that were a perfect revitalization of that brand, and it feels like that logic was never extended to any of the other franchises they have. So I don't know.
I was just checking up on it, and one platform, for example, I think this should do fantastically well on.
I know what you're going to say.
On Switch, this is $39.95. Like this, if I didn't already have it on PlayStation, if I'd and I'd see, and I'd seen more gameplay, whatever, and someone said, "Hey, do you want to try this on the Switch?" I bet it's fantastic. Like it's such a great Switch. Like it's made like Switch. It's made for that kind of pick up, put down. It's got a very so the way that it works is as this sort of game as you can imagine. But it's got these trees called, oh god, I can't remember what they're called. They've got a bit of a weird name. Whatever. They're these sort of trees that offer us save points, and when you sort of find a certain area of the map, you find one of these little trees, and if you just turn the game off and come back, you're just going to pop up at the closest tree that you were at to the bit of the game you hopped out, hop right back in, and carry on playing. It's that effortless, and I think it's also a game I think that's probably got a lot of replayability when you want to try it on like the ultimate difficulty mode and you really want to test yourself. It's got some. I've already encountered, I think I've had 3 boss fights in the 2 hours that I've been playing it. 2 were totally doable, totally fine. One was, I was like, I'm coming back here later. Like I'm
right,
done.
Okay.
This dude absolutely owned me. And I'm like, I don't want to mess around with that. I need more health, or I need more something else. It's definitely one of those games that I think is going to allow you to sort of explore and really have fun with. The combat is totally engaging and accessible. So for me, I'm not like a trying to think. So like Hollow Knight, Dead Cells, I like those games. I enjoy them, but I definitely think sometimes I feel like my ability to in the combat can be lacking when it comes to some of the more harder like boss fights and things like that. But even at this point I'm at with this game, the combat feels totally accessible. It feels more accessible than that kind of game, when you get further into it and you sort of start to struggle. Like I've played like I think Metroid Dread, like some of those boss fights I probably did like 7 or 8 times.
Oh, yeah.
Like
they were tough.
They were rough, and sometimes it's nice to not feel like you suck. And I feel even with this, like I don't feel like I suck every time I've sort of faced someone who's a little bit tasty. But yeah, no,
I was going to say, even if you did, the game seems like it has a lot of difficulty and accessibility options where obviously there's like the pillars of like actually changing the difficulty, which seems like there's good choices, but also in the options, it's things like if you want to increase the parry window or just decrease the amount of damage that that you take from certain, like you can tweak all those things to your liking.
The parry window for me, like I haven't touched it, I swear maybe it's because I've gotten older. My reactions are not where they should be. And what's annoying about it, what's different about this is, it's not the case of you don't see the indicator to parry and then parry when you see it. It's like the tip of their blade will go white, and as they swing it towards you, that's when you parry. Because if you hit parry immediately, you've done it too early, and then they'll hit you with a really connecting shot, which will take a whole chunk of your health off.
And is that the thing where it flashes red?
No, so yes, yeah, that is exactly. So the whole thing, like you go red, and there's like almost like a big red line comes across you, and you're like, for God's sake! And then you have these counter parries where their weapon will turn yellow, and if you manage to get that, you'll hit them with a really powerful move afterwards. But again, their weapon might start glowing yellow when they're like 10 feet from you, and then they've got to run towards you, do a slide, jump up, and then they do the attack. And if you miss that parry at the exact right moment when you're supposed to do it, again, you're going to get like really badly hurt. And but the dodge in this game is fantastic. I've just taken to, you want me to parry you? Screw you. I've dodged under you, and then I've backflipped, jumped up in the air, done a ground slam, juggled you up into the air, and then chop, and you're dead anyway. So let's just put that parry crap aside, and I'm just going to go ham on you the second you think this fight's going that way. This fight's going a different way. But no, yeah, really, really enjoying it. I think it's great.
That works. The best offense. No, the best defense is a good offense, which I think is the reverse of the expression. But for video games, it often can work.
Yeah. Well, no. So I think no, you're right. Isn't the saying's the
I think the expression
the best defense is a good offense, which means attack and you don't get hurt.
I thought it meant the opposite. The best offense is a good defense.
No. It's the
I
other way
thought,
around. So is the best defense
I'm
is a good
pretty sure the
offense.
way I learnt it was from School of Rock, and I want to say in School of Rock she says it my way.
I mean, well, I'm pretty
I'm
sure
gonna I'm gonna fact check this. What Joan Cusack says in School of Rock.
because that's definitive.
She's no, she says the best defense is a good offense.
Yes, because
Shit,
that's what it is.
shit. Fuck you, Joan Cusack.
As the Detroit Lions are finding out as we speak.
Oh, NFL reference is Super Bowl's coming up, right?
Super Bowl's coming up next month on the 11th or the
Are you
12th.
are you having the annual Alex Jones Super Bowl extravaganza at your house again?
Not on my house, at someone else's house. And actually, I've even signed up to the season pass so I can watch all the playoff games. The Detroit Lions have made the playoffs for the first time in 30 years, and they just won the wild card match against the Rams as well. So there we go. They're doing pretty well.
There we go.
And I've put a little bit of money on them to win the Super Bowl.
I like it. I don't know what's been going on with American football, but I've been getting so much of it on my timelines. It even got to the point where, I don't know, something significant must have happened in the world of college football, I think around a week ago. And even that was like, I just kept seeing loads of tweets, people who are really happy.
I've got no idea.
There's two places that I want to say, and I don't know why. The two places are Ohio and Michigan. But I don't know why I want to say those two places, if either of them were actually involved, or if one of them was involved, whether or not they won. But those are the two words that stick to my brain when you say college football: Ohio and Michigan. So
Interesting.
any
check it
college on any people desperately waiting for EA's next college football video game who are desperately watching the Super Show, wondering whether we're gonna get a scoop on it. That's about as close as you're gonna get.
The last thing I will mention that I've been doing this week is only because I had a great time. I took the kids to see Wonka. Wonka, hey, Mr. Wonka.
Timothy Chalamet.
Yes.
Modern Controller 360's Wonka.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thought it was very good. Kids absolutely loved
Nice.
it. Shout out to Wonka. Yeah, very good.
Glad you liked it. I'd found out that, having not really heard much about that film since it released, it crossed over $500 million in box office receipts this very recently, worldwide.
Shout out to there's a lot of I love this. Maybe I'm really sad. There's a lot of English TV actors in it.
Yeah, well, it's from like the Paddington kind of guy, the guy who's done the two recent Paddington movies. So I want to say must be a lot of British kind of stuff going on sort of behind the scenes.
That makes a lot of sense. But if you enjoy British TV as I do, you'll definitely recognise some faces. And it was whereby me and my wife kept looking at each other because it was like, oh, it's so and so from so there's like a comedian we just watched recently in something like on some little British TV show, and that happened like 5 or 6 times. And it's very good. I really enjoyed it.
I like it.
Connor Matthews in the chat is saying that Michigan beat Ohio State to end a 5-game slide. So apparently that is maybe the news
Michigan beat Ohio State. Wait, so I said the two right places, Michigan and Ohio,
right next to each other as well. They're right next to each other.
Really?
Yeah.
Could I tell you what state either those are those states?
They are both states.
They're both okay. I've got to be careful here. I need to go to Sporkle a few more times and do a borderless state quiz.
The only reason I know that is because Michigan is where I used to go every summer because my grandparents live there, and that's why I support the Detroit Lions. And Ohio is next door, and the reason I know that is because we used to go to Sandusky, Ohio, to go to Cedar Point, which is a theme park. I used to ride the massive roller coasters. So there you go.
I think the problem I have with Michigan, and this is something we talked about before, is a lot of the time you learn either major US cities or state capitals and their respective states in combos. Right. And for some reason, saying Columbus, Ohio makes sense to me, which helps me remember Columbus and also remember Ohio. I don't have one of those for Michigan. And even though Detroit is in Michigan, Detroit isn't one of the cities that I say is a pairing. Detroit, I just say Detroit. I don't say Detroit, Michigan.
Oh, I
see.
see.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. I do the same thing because if I can't remember it's a state, I try to remember a city that's in it to help me. Yeah. Except for New York, that always throws me because I always forget.
Yeah. And I always remember, even though again it's another one where the city is kind of standalone and arguably from a British perspective somehow more famous than the state. I always remember Chicago, Illinois, because they say it that way in Wayne's World.
It's almost like actors. Like you always think of them with their first name, second name. They can't just be their first name. It doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
they've got to be first name, second name.
Or duos, like presenting duos. Like again, this is extremely British, but
Anne and Dec.
You never say Judy and Richard or Dec and
Oh
Anne.
no, you've got to say it the right way around. Richard and Judy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've gone completely rogue talking
Sorry.
about states.
No, the people from America love Richard and Judy.
They love Richard and Judy. 69 DJ saying Flint, Michigan. There you go.
Flint, okay,
Flint's in Michigan.
Do you know what else
I know
have
Rochester's in Michigan. I know that.
Rochester, New
Rochester.
York. Isn't there? There must be a Rochester.
Oh, there's
in New
Rochesters everywhere. To be fair, yeah.
York. Okay. The other. I'm going down another one of like thing that is going to be completely unhelpful. But the other thing that is that contributes to that is the names they have for each other in Zombieland, where they refer to each other by where
Tallahassee.
they're going, rather Tallahassee, Columbus, Wichita, and Little Rock.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's really cool.
Because they refer to each other by where their destinations are rather than their names.
Let's make this a little bit more. Let's sideswipe this a little bit more.
Sorry,
because Randall saying it. Like I do that as well. He says Boston, Massachusetts, and Bangor, Maine. Bangor. I love the fact there's a Bangor in Maine because obviously there's a Bangor in Wales.
Wales, yeah,
yeah, which we will know. But then there's a great bit in Road Trip where what's his thing you named the weird comedian?
The weird like scrawny guy.
No, the guy used to do the guys who went MTV all the time. Is it Green? Something Green?
Oh, Tom Green.
Tom Green, but he in that says, the girlfriend says like, "Where's he gone?" And he says, "Austin, Massachusetts." And she's like, "Do you mean Austin, Texas, or Boston, Massachusetts?" And she goes to the wrong university and smashes up someone's car, because she thinks that she's told the girlfriend that she slept with him, and then she's at the wrong one. She has to go to the other one. Random. Anyway, there we go.
I love it.
That's very.
I've also looked it up. Apparently, Tom Green's character name in that is Barry Manilow.
Oh yeah, that's it. And he starts making out of someone's mum at the end of when he's showing around the people at the university, and the kid just goes, "Mom," and she's like, they basically start shagging right on the grass in front of everyone in the middle of the day, which is hilarious. Anyway, right. Wow, this is going really weird. Let's make it a little bit more weird because this news story is going to be fun. Because Abby, Jamie, has finally been cast for Series 2 of HBO's The Last of Us. We were all waiting for it. We all wanted to see what was going to happen. We wanted to know how jacked Abby was going to be. And now we know that Caitlin Dever, or Caitlin Dever, however you want to say it, has been cast in the role of Abby. So she, despite who I thought she was previously confirmed. Sorry, I'm going to give you some of the other shows that she was in before I move on. I had them in front of me and I can't see them. There you go. Thank you very much. So she is an Emmy-nominated actor. Her TV credits include Last Man Standing, Justified, Unbelievable, and Dope Sick. Well, that's hard to say. She's also been in the films Booksmart, Rosaline, Next Goal Wins, and No One Will Save You. So you may well know her from those, but I don't because I've not seen any of them, and I thought she was somebody else. On the face of it, though, I will say she looks perfectly fine. She looks a little bit like the character. I'm sure they make her a dirty blonde and scrape her hair back. She'll be looking the part. But early doors, you have seen her in some of these things, Jamie. What are you thinking? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling positive. I mean, the only two things that I've seen her in, one of them you mentioned, Booksmart, is a kind of coming-of-age teen comedy, but with a focus on two female leads. You could consider, I guess, like a late entry into the super bad for a female demographic kind of style film, but it's actually quite good. It's the film that Olivia Wilde, the actress.
Yep.
Her directorial debut before she went on to do, was it called Don't Worry, Darling? The controversial Florence Pugh, Harry Styles, Chris Pine kind of borderline side. I won't get into it, but yeah, that whole chestnut. And the other thing I saw her in, it was a film called Ticket to Paradise, a film that came out a couple of years ago, which was a kind of, I guess you'd call it a romantic comedy, where Julia Roberts and George Clooney play a pair of divorcees who are forced to reunite essentially to join forces to try and stop their daughter, who is played by Caitlin Dever,
I have seen
getting
that.
married.
I
You
have seen that. Yes. No, I
Yeah,
have seen that one.
she's the
Okay.
daughter.
Right.
She goes traveling, falls in love with a local in some beautiful part of the world. I can't remember where exactly.
Yes.
And George
Okay.
Clooney and Julia Roberts reconvene to try and get the wedding cancelled, basically, in as many words. And so, which basically means I've seen her in 2 comedies, but she has been good in both. She's clearly memorable because I knew exactly who she was the second that this casting was announced. She's got previous, weirdly enough, she's got previous with Naughty Dog. She actually, I think, did voice and probably, I'm guessing, motion capture as well for the daughter of Nathan Drake in the epilogue of Uncharted 4.
Right.
Do you remember where the epilogue all of a sudden you're playing as their daughter for the last
Oh,
5
yeah,
minutes of the
yeah, yeah.
game.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the big twist. It's they retired and had a kid.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I'd forgotten all about that.
like,
Okay. She's the voice of the daughter.
Yeah, she played that character. She seems great. I wish I'd seen more of her serious work. Like looking at some of this stuff, I know, my dad watched and spoke very highly of Dope Sick. Not that that means anything to anyone listening to this, but I will say that. But
pretty serious role. Abby is not a character with much humor.
No, it's a dark role. It's a violent role. It's a pretty unforgiving role, and it's also a role where you're curious. You're always fascinated to know how much actors do and don't have an insight into this, but you have to prepare yourself for everything that is going to come with being Abby in the online era. If you're going to be on socials, someone I hope has already spoken to her and be like, get ready.
Okay,
so be raw.
This is a question I asked you before the pod. Does she need to be jacked?
If you're going to ask it like that, no, she doesn't need to be jacked. There's a part of me that would like her to be jacked, or at least somewhat jacked, because I do feel like while it did lead to some weird, confusing misdirections and conspiracy theories and rumors around Abby's gender, no, specifically that she was so jacked that she must be transgender, which obviously wasn't true.
Jamie, you can't get steroids in the post-apocalyptic world.
Well,
right?
Yeah, there was also that. But I just think Abby being big and Abby being physically imposing was an inherent part of her character to me, and in the way that I kind of interpreted her role through the game, and the way that she contrasted with Ellie at times, who still, even though she's older in part 2, is still not frail per se, but looks small compared to Abby. A lot of people look small compared to Abby, and that was an interesting choice in a video game where you can make a character look like anyone to make them jacked. And I wouldn't have minded seeing a bit more of that represented, but I don't think we're going to get any of that based on what Caitlin Dever looks like and based on the fact that they're filming next month. And ultimately, I think that's fine, but I wouldn't have minded it.
It's the thing for me, because people talk about arms and they sort of say she's got big arms. That for me was not the thing. Big arms is not that difficult to achieve. You can have big arms if your body happens to store fat in the right place and you do some bicep curls. You can have, quote, big arms. They might not look like, might not be ripped or cut. For me, it was Abby's back. There's a shot where from behind she's wearing a vest top, and that her back is damn impressive. She's pulling some weight. To be that broad and robust. Not to mention the fact that in the game, when you play as Abby, you get to hit some people pretty hard, running into them like a train. And I think without that, she needs to have some kind of. It doesn't need to be jacked. For me, she doesn't need to be cut, ripped, whatever you want to call it. No. But if she is not physically imposing, in some sense, done through camera trickery, I don't want to see, we were saying, will they body swap her with someone else and replace her head to make her look bigger? I don't think they should go that route, but they need to have some scenes where she is shown to be physically impressive. And I think you made the point. They don't need to go too far down the road, because Bella Ramsey is not. And so she just needs to be more imposing than Bella Ramsey. But if you get to a point where we're going to see, once again, Pedro Pascal getting his face caved in, as we did in Game of Thrones, but this time it's not the Mountain, and it is Caitlin Dever, I don't know how to say it.
Maybe it's even Diva.
Diva. I feel like
I
it
don't
would.
know.
I feel like it would be. I feel like it would take something away if it feels like he could have just got up and taken the golf club off her.
Well,
Obviously, it's a bit different because there's a lot of other people in the room with guns.
yeah,
But
it's also worth noting that before getting beaten to death with a golf club, he gets shot with a shotgun and his entire leg comes off.
does his leg go? Oh yeah, they shoot him. I
Yeah,
forgot. I totally forgot they were
put one of
shooting
those
him.
they put one of those straps on like to stop it bleeding.
Oh
To,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
they can.
I forgot about that.
So he is slightly incapacitated. But by the way, huge spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2 here for anyone that's a couple of years late.
Come on.
I
now.
mean, we have to at this point, yeah. And I'll be honest, if you put me in a room with Caitlin Dever and I had just been shot with a shotgun and she had a golf club, Caitlin Dever with a golf club could fuck me up.
No,
So I'm fine with it.
But in that moment on the screen, I'm sure like she's a very good actress, so I'm sure at that moment it won't actually matter how like physically imposing she is, as long as the performance sells it.
And that's the key. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like so many of the castings in Last of Us season 1 were kind of controversial until they weren't controversial.
Right.
And a lot of them became not controversial once we saw them. If they are doing what they said they're doing, which is they're continuing to cast people based on their acting chops and who can bring those roles to life, then in so many cases, gender, race, in this case, physique, they took a character from the first game and made them deaf and made them speak with sign language, and it added to the show, in my opinion. So, they took a character who was alluded to being in a homosexual relationship and made an entire episode about that actual homosexual relationship. And it was the most critically acclaimed episode of that entire show. I'm comfortable with the directions they want to take. I think they've earned enough trust to not have to exclusively look at a pool of actors who are of above average muscularity, and I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, to be fair, the only reason I'm leaning into it is because it was one of the biggest controversies about the entirety of the game when it came out.
It was. How funny would it be if people started complaining about Caitlin Dever's physique and Neil Druckmann shot back like, hang on, I thought you guys said that physique wasn't possible in the apocalypse. We were bending over backwards to we thought you guys were right. That physique is totally impossible.
So we changed it.
Yeah, we thought you guys were absolutely right. All you fucking incels on the Last of Us 2 subreddit.
Imagine that all that starts up again and they get to fight again. There you go. Because I will just give you the blurb that Variety have given for Abby's character. So for Caitlin Dever's character, they say she is a skilled soldier whose black and white view of the world is challenged as she seeks vengeance for those she loved. Which is a nice little write-up for Abby. One thing that is going to be interesting is they've confirmed that Season 2 is not going to be the entirety of The Last of Us Part 2. And so obviously gives them some leeway to, whilst we've said, they start filming next month. And so they're doing whatever they're doing at the moment with the characters. We don't know at what point it's going to cut off and what point that's going to go to like Season 3, which gives them obviously like another year or whatever before they even start filming whatever part of Season 2 whatever part of Part 2 they move on to with Season 3, because we don't know yet if this is going to stretch into, like we said, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. Well, we know it's not 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons and how long it's actually going to go on for. But there's so much they can do with it, and like you said, the characters are so interesting, and there's so much cool stuff to get your teeth into.
Yep. Totally.
We should also mention at this point that they have also cast. Whereas they've also got the Jesse's character, which is the actor from Beef, which is young Mazzino is going to be playing Jesse, and you've got Dora the Explorer's Isabella Merced is going to be playing Dina, obviously the love interest for Bella Ramsey's character, which is that's going to be weird. I don't know how old Isabella Merced is, but Bella Ramsey still looks hella young to me, and I know.
Well, this is the problem is that like I think they're both already older than Ellie is. In the game.
Bella Ramsey looks like 14 years old.
Bella Ramsey's 20.
Wow. Okay, fair enough.
And Isabella Merced is 22.
Oh, so
and Ellie is 19?
Yeah, I was going to say she's like 19, something like that. So
I
that's
think Ellie just
yeah.
it just looks very old for 19, and Bella Ramsey looks very
Haggard.
young for 20, and I think it's as simple as that.
To be
One thing
fair,
that
yeah.
Sorry. One thing I will say is that there's a picture actually. Clearly, they knew before we did of Bella Ramsey and Isabella Merced sort of posing together at an award show from like 3 weeks ago,
Right.
and they're the same height. And when you see them together, you're like, okay, I can
Oh,
see a
okay,
bit
yeah.
of Tina in that. While you make your point, I'm try and find that picture and share it with you.
No, all I was going to say was it's one I think that Ellie is quite haggard because of, I imagine, the world that she lives in, and how she sort of what she has to deal with. So probably reasonable as to why she's looking a little bit older than her 19 years. Oh, okay, yeah, no, that is one thing. So because that having people the same height does so much heavy lifting when you've got to have like a romantic interest thing. What you don't want is like one who's 2 feet taller than the other one, because then it completely throws off like ages and stuff, makes it look really weird. I'm trying to think what Dina looks like. She fine. Dina, that's fine.
Yeah, like she looks enough like Dina that I think it will pass as Dina. No, yeah. Also, apparently, just looking at heights, Caitlin Dever apparently is almost identical in height to Bella Ramsey.
I knew you were going to say that.
So
I was hoping you were going to say Pedro Pascal. I was like, say Pedro Pascal. Don't say Bella Ramsey.
no, Pedro Pascal's not massive. He's 100. He's about 5'10", 5'10.5".
So how tall is Bella Ramsey? Because I always think of her as being quite small.
According to Google, she's about 5'1.5", and Caitlin Dever's about 5'2".
So Abby is 5'1.5".
But no, Abby's 5'2".
She's 5'2".
Yeah,
I might have to completely denounce and reject what I've said previously on this podcast, and so
interestingly,
I'm sure they'll make
Storm Reed, who played, I forget. I'm going to forget the character's name. Riley in the character from the Left Behind DLC, which obviously basically got its own episode in the show. Ellie's sort of initial love interest or first love interest is apparently 5'8".
Okay,
so maybe she should have been Abby all along.
To be fair, like TV and film have no problems in adjusting how people look on camera. If there's one thing they're good at, it's making people look different sizes to what they really are. No names mentioned.
Tom Cruise.
No names mentioned.
We're all thinking it.
I was actually the worst one. Not the worst one. I don't mean that. I love him. I've been a fan of him for decades. Sylvester Stallone.
Oh yeah.
He's like 5'4" apparently.
And legally a dwarf in certain nations.
But he looks fantastic in like every film he's in, and so I'm not worried.
All right,
they'll be able to make Abby look, big and imposing and whatever. They just come on, man. Please let them. Don't fluff that whole thing.
I'm starting to think Jonesy's got like a weird muscle fetish or something.
I do a little bit.
Freak.
Do a little bit. What we should also say, Nick Offerman. So from one, like we said, the critically acclaimed episode where Nick Offerman played Bill in season 1. He won an Emmy for his performance. He has claimed that a mini-series about Bill and Frank and their relationship was pitched at some point, not to come to anything at this point, as you know, apparently, unfortunately. Despite what you think of that episode, I was not a big fan. I was a big fan of the episode. I wasn't a big fan of the change from the game. Okay. And I know I'm in a limited number of people. I was annoyed that they completely flipped it.
In what sense?
Oh, so they took a relationship. So in the game, Frank leaves Bill and says, "I would rather be dead than spend one more day with you."
Oh, and in the film, well, I'm trying to. In the TV show, Frank dies of.
Frank is dying, and Bill kills himself as well. To be together and to do everything together, yeah. And so I was like, "That is an interest." But Druckmann did it, so it's up to him. They're his characters, his whatever. So I'm not griping, but I'm just saying, when that hit home for me in the game when it was like, wow, imagine someone telling you they would rather suffer death in the most horrible way alone in a zombie infested post apocalyptic world rather than be with you. I was like, that is that is
Yeah,
a moment, and then to sort of flip it on its head and then do the complete opposite. I don't know. I thought it was a choice. Wasn't one I was expecting. I suppose that's where I'll
that's
go
fair.
with that.
No, that's fair enough. I know that episode did divide some opinions at the time. I think
But
if you look at the IMDb user reviews, it's still the most polarizing episode.
okay, but a fantastic episode. Like I really liked it. And actually, if you say to me they were going to make a mini series based on that, that to me sounds really interesting. Of those
Well,
two characters in that world.
there is a part of me that wonders if the reason it didn't go any further is because someone pointed out that the entirety of their relationship, from the moment they meet to the moment they die together, is
Is
already in that episode.
you?
So it doesn't really need any more ground to be covered. But there
Every
we go.
episode is like Rogue One.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to fit perfectly into somewhere of The Last of Us to make it work. Yeah. Last point on this is that season 2 is expected to come in 2025, while Grounded 2, the documentary which tracks the development of the second game, will launch next week alongside part 2, the game remaster. And you will also, I don't know if this is at launch, but you will also be able to watch the documentary inside of the game, much like you could part 1, as I did not know, and Jamie had to tell me before the show, you could in The Last of Us part 1, which I have not seen either part. So
Oh, sorry. Worth watching. I don't know how Grounded 2. Sorry, excuse me. The first Grounded holds up now. But yes, they're still describing Grounded 2 as being available, quote, on YouTube and as part of a post-launch update for The Last of Us Part 2. So doesn't sound like you can watch that documentary in the game day one if you do pick it up day one. But it will just be on YouTube. So trailers out there for anyone interested. It does look like they are have got cameras rolling as much as they could, I guess, because obviously it was partly developed and certainly shipped during COVID. But they do have cameras rolling for some of the unpleasantness that happened during that game's development, and it looks like they captured some of the impact that stuff had, as well as capturing some fascinatingly candid conversations of like fucking Troy Baker on set in the what do they call it, in the place where they do all the motion capture. I forget the fancy word they have for it, where he's like joking about them not killing Joel, or joking about Joel coming back, and them talking about the decision to kill Joel, and they're like, what if we did something wild? Like, what if we just said, fuck it, like, let's kill Joel? And like, it's interesting to hear the creators behind the game like speak candidly
say
about
that sort of stuff.
a decision that resonated through that game's history to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. That I need to watch that. I need to watch that first part and get ready for the second part, because I'd love to see that. It's funny, you talk about like behind the scenes and some of the stuff they did, and immediately my brain went to one of my favorite things I've ever seen in a game, and it's so. Mate, is it minuscule? It's so like kind of like small fry, but it just this sort of attention to detail. And I want to say it's a part where I think you find out that Abby doesn't like heights, and then at one point you're walking over a section, and the way that the camera moves, it makes it's almost like a Spielberg zoom. It makes everything feel horrible and disconcerting, and it gives you the sense of like vertigo, even though you're not experiencing it. And I was like, damn, these guys know how to make video games. This is amazing. So yeah,
absolutely.
I'd love to see more of behind the scenes of them in Grounded part 1 and part 2, which is coming soon. Okay, let's move on to the final story that we're going to talk about today. We are going to be talking about the Xbox Developer Digital, which is coming this month, featuring Indiana Jones, Avowed, and Hellblade 2. I'm not going to lie. The reason I'll be watching the Developer Direct is because I'm super excited to see more about that Indiana Jones game and to see what is going on with it, where it's at, what it's going to be. I'm pretty excited, Jamie, if I'm being honest.
I think that's kind of the only reason that we're talking about this before it's happened, because obviously the stream's going to happen on Thursday for anyone who wants to keep an eye out for it. But I think, I don't know, when there were rumblings that the Developer Direct would happen again, I remembered last year's one, and obviously outside of the surprise announcement and shadow drop of Hi-Fi Rush, which was awesome, one of the highlights of the year, the Developer Direct itself was kind of a little bit like, okay, like we got another look at, I think, was it Redfall at the time we got a deep dive on, and Minecraft Legends and that kind of stuff. So I was like, it's cool if you're into these games, but it's all going to depend on what they're showing. And when they came out and they were like, Avowed sort of makes sense and is exciting. I want to see what Obsidian are cooking up. Hellblade 2 definitely makes sense. But when they were like, yeah, we're going to show you Indiana Jones. I did not expect that. I thought Indiana Jones would be AWOL for a lot longer and would come back in, uh, without sounding, throwing any shade at the developer direct, would come back in slightly flashier circumstances. Like
Right.
you could open an Xbox and Bethesda, well, I guess you have to call it Xbox Bethesda Activision Blizzard King showcase with Indiana Jones nowadays, such as the size of that IP. So it's interesting that it's happening now, but really cool. And like you said, Machine Games, they're obviously they're FPS guys. They're the Wolfenstein team, and even when you go back to prior to the formation of Machine Games, look at where some of those employees trace their roots back to. I can't. Annoyingly, I can't remember the name of the studio now. But like, there's fucking Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher Bay DNA still present in Machine
That
Games.
was such a good game, man. Sorry, I
Agreed.
digress.
But now, I'll throw it to you, like as an indie fan, like there's a feeling, it's in some corners of the internet, that this has to be a third-person game because you don't get the Indiana Jones license and make the first big Indiana Jones game for decades and have it be a game where you stare at Indiana Jones, presumably hairy knuckles and a whip for 20 hours,
You made that really good point, which was before the pod, was imagine if they don't show Indiana Jones in an Indiana Jones game, and it's like,
Yeah.
what? Oh yeah, wow, that would suck. Like, I
And
need to see Indiana Jones, but
we've already seen the exact same combination of publisher and licensee in the form of Disney and Marvel working with Bethesda and Arcane on the Blade game that was announced the other month. And they confirmed out the gate that was a third-person game, which is extremely rare for Arcane, who, again, between Prey and Dishonored and Redfall and Deathloop, are, again, like FPS masters making a third-person game, probably because the license requires it,
I cannot imagine. Like, you think of the games that kind of touch on the same sort of thing as Indiana Jones, and I just don't really see how they work as first-person games. Like, I'm with you. For me, it's got to be a third-person game, and chances are, I think almost certainly we are going to get to see some of that in the developer showcase. They're talking about showing more than 10 minutes of game and developer insights, and we're going to see the first gameplay trailer, which is going to be really exciting. Like, Indiana Jones is such an exciting sort of idea, property that has probably spawned things like Tomb Raider, like Uncharted. A lot of those have got the Indiana Jones DNA running through them, and so I think it's kind of exciting to see how the game from the grandfather of that sort of thing is going to come together, and how a developer as good as Machine Games are going to do it, even though their pedigree is in first-person games. I don't really have any worries about them sort of getting a little bit outside their wheelhouse. And it's not completely outside the wheelhouse, Jamie, because they love Nazis, and Indiana Jones loves to mess with Nazis. And so,
that is a very good point.
notoriously, Wolfenstein, you do get to see Hitler in a fashion, and in Indiana Jones, you do get to see Hitler as well when he signs his book in The Last Crusade. So there we go.
Oh my God. If there's any of the way that Machine Games handled Hitler, especially in Wolfenstein 2, The New Colossus, where for anyone who hasn't played that game or doesn't remember, Hitler is portrayed as this senile, like, lunatic who is pissing himself, throwing up, shooting people when they don't do exactly what he wants the moment he wants them to. And all of this is happening while he is trying to cast, Terror Billy, aka William Blazkowicz, in a propaganda movie based off the exploits of BJ Blazkowicz, that BJ himself has snuck himself into a Nazi base that's like on the planet Neptune or something like that. It's like it's somewhere in deep space, disguising himself as himself by simply putting on a fake mustache to audition to play himself in a propaganda film directed by like a Hitler who is barely alive and is, like I said, pissing himself. And what a wonderful, wonderful sequence. That I hope that there's some of that. There probably won't be any of that energy in Indiana Jones.
I think I think there should be, though. Like, I kind of hope there is. Like, at its core, Indiana Jones does have a lot of sort of humor, and a lot of it does derive from like messing with Nazis in fun ways, or like over the top fights with mustachioed muscle men, and sort of silliness and stupidness. And it's
Or
that
when Indy shoots the guy rather than getting into the actual sword fight with him and stuff like that.
exactly like there is humor there. There's fun to be had, and I think if they need to inject some of that, like I'm going to say unfortunately. Maybe I will. Unfortunately, I watched the recent Indiana Jones. Is it in the Spear of Destiny? I think it's called.
Okay.
Something like
Or
that.
was it Dial of Destiny?
Thank you,
Was
Dial of
it was it
Destiny.
was it Double D?
It was Dial of Destiny. You're right. And I did not love it.
Right. Yeah.
And I think a big part of that was like Harrison Ford, fantastic, but I think he's too old to be playing that character in those films again. And they know he is, which is why they then try and inject youth by having, in the previous one they had Shia LaBeouf, and in this one they had I always want to call her Fleabag. I can't remember Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Waller-Bridge, excuse me.
And to me it just doesn't work. Like so I don't want that. I don't want that Indiana Jones. I want young Indiana Jones. I want energy Indiana Jones. Like you said, I want him cockily shooting a guy with a sword, whipping stuff, and kind of doing over the top stunts whilst dodging boulders and getting off with the girl. Like that's what I want. That is what I'm hoping for in this 10 minutes. I'm hoping we get to see some of that energy.
Can we at least make the concession that we momentarily go into first-person mode if we're going to do the getting off with the girl part? Because,
sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. If we're getting off with the girl, we're going to go... Or do we want to go God of War and like pull back and have them in a bed and we can just mash square and X and triangle and circle?
Ooh, maybe. I'd be down with that as well. And also, I'd love it if we could implement some kind of smell-o-vision. I know it's a future technology, but if we are going to have some fucking in there, then I wouldn't mind the smell-o-vision.
Lovely. We have potentially got a name for the game. Recent trademarks have suggested that the game could be called Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. And also we've got suggestions that the game may be further ahead than we thought. As you alluded to earlier on, Jamie, is that we were thinking that we wouldn't see anything this year and that it was going to take a little longer. There are some suggestions that it could potentially be a 2024 game, which is a little bit mind-blowing when you kind of think of what the scope of this game must be with such an important IP that they've pulled out all the stops. If they managed to get out this year, they would have really pulled out all the stops. But yeah, no, I'm excited for it. And looking forward to seeing what we get to see at this developer direct.
Yeah, for sure. I was surprised by that as well. Like the source on that one for us is Insider Gaming, which means it's a Tom Henderson joint, and he's I don't know. At this point, Tom Henderson usually doesn't sort of put his money where his mouth is, unless he's pretty happy with the sources that he's been able to cross-reference for that information. Obviously, dates slip and plans change all the time, so who knows if there'll actually be a date on anything we see this week. But it's encouraging to hear that game is further ahead of schedule than some of us imagined it might be, because it will not just because it means we get to play an Indiana Jones game sooner, but also I think it's like bodes well for what some people I think still look at as a somewhat iffy Xbox first-party lineup and first-party output. Like when things like Indiana Jones are getting up to speed and getting ready to see the light of day, then it suggests that the building of infrastructure and the investment in studios that they've done over the years is kind of bearing fruits. Where, like, if Hellblade 2 avowed Indiana Jones, they're also going to talk about Ara History Untold, but that's not a game that's particularly on my radar. I apologize for anyone out there that it's their bag, but like those could be three massive games. Avowed in particular really needs a strong showing, I think, because the sentiment with Avowed went from a cinematic trailer that released not too long after The Outer Worlds. Everyone looked at it and went, "Oh my god, Obsidian got bought, and now they're making their Skyrim. They're making their big fantasy RPG. I can't wait." And then we saw that kind of in-engine trailer last year or whatever it was, and people kind of went, doesn't look exactly what I thought it was going to look like. I think a developer direct is the perfect platform for a game like Avowed to get a bit more time, a bit more breathing room, a 10-15 minute long segment, chats with developers and key creative personnel behind the scenes, learn a little bit more about that world and what Obsidian are going for, because fundamentally the chops that are still present behind closed doors at a studio like Obsidian are of the highest order. I think Avowed could be really cool. And I
Yeah.
hope that we see that on Thursday.
Absolutely. I think the only other thing to mention that we hope we may see at this direct is the potential for a cheeky little shadow drop, because last year we had the surprise of a shadow drop of Hi-Fi Rush, which fantastic game. We're not expecting. Absolutely loved it. I know that you did as well. I had very high praise for that game. So some fans speculating that there may be a shadow drop this time around as well. So yeah. Maybe check it out. Just keep your eyes peeled. What day is it? Thursday? Did we say it was Thursday?
I believe it's Thursday. Yeah, Thursday the 18th, if I'm not mistaken. Not sure 100% about timings, but if I remember right, last year I don't remember it being particularly late one. I think it was fairly reasonably timed. But yeah, a shadow drop would be amazing. And the cool thing about a potential shadow drop is that like Hi-Fi Rush was a Game of the Year contender caliber video game, but that was entirely developed in secret. Like no one knew anything about it at a studio that had never made anything like it at all and hadn't even released a game that long before. Like Tango Gameworks weren't that hot off the heels of Ghostwire Tokyo, which is a completely different genre. It was unlike anything they made before, and all of a sudden it was just out. If Xbox have it up their sleeve to have had another project like that secretly being made somewhere behind the scenes, then that would be fucking awesome, and I would embrace that with open arms. But remains to be seen.
Yeah,
might be a bit ambitious to, because there's probably a very sensible person at Xbox who says it's a cool idea, Phil, but you realise that if we do it twice in a row, then we're telling people we're going to do it every year forever.
They'll expect. Hey, let's put two things together. Apparently, Indiana Jones is further along than people think, and there's a potential for shadow drop at the direct. Yeah. You heard it here first. Indiana Jones is shadow dropping at the end this week.
I think Avowed looks better than people expect it to. Indiana Jones has a 2024 label on it. Hellblade 2 has an actual date on it, and it's sooner than people expected. And then before you know it, like, people are very happy with what is essentially just a quick check-in with 4 different studios and 4 different games. Like, this isn't meant to be one of those big hype building, what's going to be the surprise announcement, what are they going to... It's not an E3 thing.
No.
But I still think that they're getting a lot of leverage out of it, which is awesome. By the way, 3 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time.
There you go. Not too long to wait. And with that was the last story that we had to touch on. There's not much left to do except to say thank you very much, Jamie, for joining me once again for our 194th episode of the Super Show.
Yeah.
Just because they've been very squeaky and loud in the last sort of like 15 minutes, I would like to apologise if anyone's heard the noises of infestation. I'm not infested. My sons have actually got some pet rats that they got a couple of weeks ago, and so if you've heard them, they're scrapping and squeaking at one another right next to me. So if you've heard that, I do apologise. And now Jamie is grossed out, so he's gonna go.
I've already made it clear I'm never going to Jonesy's house again now. I don't care if the rats are like removed from the premises. I'm never setting foot there again.
Yeah, fair enough. We had some people around the other day, and we actually hid them because they didn't like rats, so we had to
I thought that the rats go everywhere. Though you can't hide rats unless you put them in a cage.
They're in a cage. They're not loose.
I don't know, mate. I watched the Pied Piper. Well, I didn't watch the Pied Piper. It's a very old story, but I know the Pied Piper.
I know
the rat. Mate, you're talking to someone who's in the middle of playing a Plague Tale Requiem.
Of course, I forgot about that.
I don't want to think about rats right now.
Keep the rats away from me. Okay. There you go.
But thank you for doing such a wonderful job hosting, Jonesy. You're a star.
No, thank you, mate, for your insightful commentary, as always. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the live or for joining us afterwards. Thank you, everyone on YouTube, for talking to me as we were going along. Also, keeping me on the straight and narrow and giving me a little, tidbits of information when we weren't quite there with some of those things that we touched on. So I appreciate it. And we will see you same time, same place next week. And